If I may step in.
Steve, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that most of the people that I met, I got to realize this was 1976, and I stepped into the 94th Congress, and a world was different back then. And the political interaction, there was always arguments, but nothing that turned this bitterly personal. The media was wildly different back then. But I wanted to say that I worked for 3 freshman members of Congress, a Democrat and 2 Republicans. And every one of them walked in the door with a sense of wanting to do what was right. There was a collegiality between the R's and the D's that has vanished. I attribute it mostly to the last con man we had in the White House. But I also wanted to say that when I got there, it was before staff on Capitol Hill were covered by fair labor practices or a bunch of other things. It was called the last plantation. And I watched 3 new members of Congress give in to the power and the enticements of that position. You become a virtual prince. And the money actually was and still is pretty healthy compared to what things are like here in the Southern Tier. But it's the power, it's the enticement, it's the special treatment that they get that they just don't seem to want to give up. And one little sidebar. I admitting to having been a Pollyanna, and I was brought up in a house in Bath, New York, where my dad was a diehard Roosevelt Democrat, and my mother voted Republican just to cancel his vote. So I got a chance to make up my own mind pretty much. But when I left Capitol Hill to go to another one of those criminal type occupations as a lobbyist, when I left, I wanted to write the great American novel about how people change when they get into the special treatment that they get in Congress. I had the title of it, but I've never had the ambition to write it. The title was Elected and Presumed Lost. And I still feel that way, very honestly, that good people go there. But the enticements of the job, if you watch how many people, I've returned to retire here, and I keep running into people like me who are lifelong Republicans for, almost all their life. But these days are a little embarrassed. It's not because the politics here have changed. They certainly have changed on the national scale. And I don't think the party labels mean much anyway. And I want to finish this way, and then I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. But I want to read you a little warning that I found. Someone said at one point, and I'm going to quote now, political parties can become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be unable to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterward the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. So if you follow it back to people who say parties are the big problem, take it all the way back. That was in George Washington's farewell address in September of 1796, warning us that this kind of rancor could develop. And it bothers me. I spent my life in one party. When I came back to New York, I registered as an independent. And I find a lot of friends that feel that same way. It's generally an unhealthy embarrassment that the political system has come to this. I guess that's pretty much my summation, and it's sad to see. I'm not sure I agree with Tom, however, in thinking that there may not be a fix to it. Eventually, unless we go the Jonestown Act in this cult river we seem to be stuck in, people will come back to their senses, I think.
Steve Sprague, you have a unique set of credentials, former congressional staffer for several congressmen, a former reporter, political reporter, background as a television journalist. Overall, has journalism let the American people down? We heard earlier that George Santos lied and lied and lied and lied, and no one called him on it, or at least not loud enough, because a lot of people didn't know, and a lot of stuff then came out. Has journalism in America let the American people down? And if so, why? Maybe not. Steve Sprague.
Well, let me say to start with that I would hope my colleague Jeff is champing at the bit to address this one too. Journalism, when I was an active journalist and we had 30 news people in the newsroom of the Star Gazette, or even just when Tom and I were together on Channel 36, we operated by a set of ethics, journalistic ethics. I always thought that when I retired from government, I'd like to go teach journalistic ethics, but nobody's asking for any class like that these days. The 24-hour news cycle, as we have seen recently with Fox News, the sellout, the absolute lying to follow the cult and keep the income. But back to George Santos, Jeff and I will both tell you that we know that he was revealed, he was unveiled, he was stripped bare of all of those stories by a small journalistic organization. And the big ones didn't bother to listen to them. So the lesson here is to listen to the journalists who are trying to tell you what they are. And the sadness recently is that journalist has, it's become a tawdry employment, apparently, if you listen to the advocates who don't want the truth to be told. So my set of careers, maybe I can take some credit for a couple of years in the military, but my set of careers, journalism, congressional staff, lobbyist for a blue-collar organization, bus companies, and Homeland Security, a do-it-nothing bureaucrat, are not going to be very convincing. But those are the points that have been lost. And very honestly, I would invite all of you to join in the effort that I've tried to talk Dr. Coleman into joining with me and my colleague Tom to get more local news coverage on local government, because that's where people who should be responding across the country learn what they should be learning and become a little more acquainted with the product. Okay.
Thanks, Steve, for that. I want to mention also that I think when it comes to local news, most Americans trust local TV news than they do the national news. And I do think you get assemble a good team of reporters, shoe leather reporters that go out and get the stories. I've been very impressed at WETM, the relatively new news director at WETM, Jim Turpin, has hired a number of people, and they're going out and getting stories, and I think they're making a big difference. You're not going to find at this point the same stories in the traditional press, but you do find it on local TV news, and I think that's why the American people in general, and I think people in the Twin Tiers, trust local journalism. Wanted to bring, George Santos, that situation, local news, what we've been talking about. Jeff Murray, Jeff, this is right up your alley. What would you like to say about what you've been hearing?
Well, I'd like to make several points, and I'd like to follow up on what my colleague Steve Sprague said, and one of them was he was talking about how he worked with a couple of freshman congressmen, and I had the pleasure of covering a freshman congressman, Amo Houghton, when he was elected in 1986. And that made me think about a couple of concerns that I have, and that's about, as somebody who's in the communications business, I see a couple of things that are raising red flags for me. One is the coarsening of the discussion. Two is the suppression of discussion or attempted suppression of discussion. I go back to, I look at, Amo Houghton was a Republican, but he wasn't a hyper partisan Republican. He was known for reaching across the aisle, not to give in to the other side, but to say, how can we meet in the middle and do what's best for the people of our district and for the country? And he always preached civility. And I think that message has been lost. I think that when you've got people, I'm, as a journalist, as a communicator, I am all about and all in favor of open discussion. But, there's a point that when you're trying to shout over each other and lose that civility, then nobody's hearing the other person, and you're really not getting anywhere. And the opposite of that is when some people don't want to hear opposite points of view at all. They want to suppress that. And I totally disagree. As Voltaire said, I disagree completely with what you're saying, but I will defend to the death your right to say. And I agree too. I think Rush Limbaugh used to say, believe in debating in the marketplace of ideas. No matter what the idea was, get it out there, debate it openly, and the ideas that had the most merit would float to the top. Not, I don't like your idea, so you should be silenced. I don't believe in that. I hear a lot of opinions that I don't necessarily agree with, and I don't say I think those people should be silenced. I just turn the channel or read a different page in the newspaper or whatever. And as far as I'm concerned, they have just as much right to express their opinion as anybody else. So those things are both a concern to me.
Jeff, if I may make one quick remark.
Yeah.
Amo Houghton was not a standard everyday congressman like we know them. He went there as in the very classic patrician sense. he was contributing his public service. And we all know that the family, and Amo in particular, was such a generous and down-to-earth person. If we had 435 members of Congress like Amo, I'd be a happy camper. I can go out and mow the lawn and think that the world is in proper order.
Well, Amo certainly did not go to Congress to get rich. So he already was rich, but he was one of the most down-to-earth people I ever met in my life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other point I wanted to make real quick, it was talking about the media role, and I think there are a lot of journalists who are still old school and still, they believe they want to play things right down the middle. They try and be fair. They try and present every side to an issue and present the facts as best as they understand them, and then let the readers or the viewers decide. I do see, and it's not just Fox News. A lot of different news outlets sometimes they present opinion and present it as fact or news. And it's not a Republican or Democrat thing. I've seen it on both sides. And obviously, news organizations, newspapers have opinion pages. TV networks have commentators, and that's fine as long as it's clearly marked. This person is a commentator. He's giving you his opinion. This person is a reporter. They're reporting the facts as they understand them and telling you what other people are saying about these facts. Sometimes those lines are a little blurred. And I think that's where people, at least from what I'm seeing, people start to lose faith in the media because they think people are giving them that journalists have an agenda. No matter what their political leaning, that's driving their reporting because they're trying to get their message across, their agenda promoted, instead of telling the people, as Walter Cronkite would say, that's the way it is.
But if I could jump in, one thing about the press, because here it is, the press is promoting a lot of these individuals, and the individuals are behaving this way so that they can be seen by the press. And people might say, hey, this guy Richard is always talking about black, blah, 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 blah. We don't trust the press because the press wasn't covering Black people during those time periods that you're even talking about. You guys can talk about the history and how you worked in Congress, so forth, so on, and that's good. But then too, there was no Black representation. And so when we see, and this is part of that sickness or that mental illness, locking out people. The press wasn't talking about gerrymandering, headlining, so forth, so on. And so it locked out a whole race of people. And I should say races because the Japanese, the Germans, the Jews, so forth, so on, the Japanese, so forth, so on, and Blacks. And so even the press was biased, and the press only wanted to do things that would sell papers. If that story was not going to sell papers, then they're not going to run it, regardless of how important it might be to society. Also, we all do have our own personal biases, And so therefore, reporters are reporting from their own personal bias. They've got to listen to their editors. They may write a great story, but the editor would say, well, that's not going to sell the paper. Or the news person, that's not going to be on the broadcast. And so, here again, the sickness of Congress is also who are the enablers. The press is a big enabler of their sickness. Only reason why they follow around Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she's going to say something foul, so forth, so on. And the one from Goldberg, and the one from Colorado. And so why are they getting all this getting seen in the press? And now the whole buildup today is who's going to run for president. Where you have DeSantis, who is saying some very foul things, doing very foul things. Now he's going after Black fraternities and sororities and saying that they should not be on their campuses there in the state of Florida. This man gets to be president and we're trying to do that on the national level. So, where the whole thing about being woke, saying, hey, y'all are sleeping. You need to get on and see what's happening in our society today. And, here's another, thing of woke in terms of what's happening in Congress, how there is this illness within these Congress individuals, congressional people, in terms of power grabbing, money hungry, so forth, so on. And they're not seeing to the needs of what the local constituents are needing, or rather the people of their state, the needs of the people of their state.
Mhm.
Okay, Steve, if I could jump in here, I'd like to, say something about because
Go ahead. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So I'm on. Yes, I'm unmuted. But one of the things, and I forget who used the phrase of reporters going right down the middle, right? But one of the things that I think is a problem with the media is too much going right down the middle. There are issues where there really aren't two rational sides. There really aren't two valid arguments, right? I mean, to take it to an extreme, the flat Earth argument, it would be bad journalism to put on somebody to talk about how the Earth is flat and somebody to refute them, because there are facts and we need to work with those facts. And I think there's altogether too much of the media not actually assessing what's being told. They will give the two sides a microphone and just present both sides as being equal, whether they're equal or not. And I think a possible cause of this, and it sounds like WETM is doing some great local reporting, but newspapers are getting smaller, news departments are getting cut back. There are fewer and fewer people out there doing this kind of work that we need done, and that's a problem, right? This is a number of years ago now, but I had a friend who started working for the Lake City Reporter in Florida, and I drove through town, and because she was working on the paper, I picked up a copy of the paper and was amazed to see that she had written every single word on the front page, and most of the rest of the paper was stuff from the AP. There's a lot of places where there aren't the boots on the ground that are doing the kind of reporting that we need. And that leads to this sort of, let's call it lazy both sidesism, where we're not assessing what we're being told about things.
Anybody want to?
I'd like to, can I address that real quick?
Sure.
Yes, Mary.
I understand your point. You're saying there are, obviously there are issues where, if somebody approached me and say, hey, I believe in baby beating, I want to do a story about that. Obviously every sane person would say, well, that's not something that could be justified. Or if you were to say that I want to talk about why I believe Hitler was a great man, or clearly there are some topics, like you say, that anybody with any common sense would say there's not two sides to that. Most issues, and a lot of the issues that I deal with are not that cut and dried, and I personally, and as somebody who deals with this on a daily basis, I don't want to be the one to be in a position to decide, okay, I think this argument has more weight than that argument. Obviously, there is a reason that most newspapers and other journalistic outlets have an editorial page or commentators that let those people take apart and analyze issues and let them say, here's what I think you should think about this issue. Make it clear that this is their opinion. My job as a journalist is to present the facts as the best of my ability, as I understand them, and to get the opinions of the people who are stakeholders in that particular circumstance or topic, and let the readers or the viewers decide for themselves. I'd like to think that most of our readers are fairly intelligent people, and if you present the facts, and just and try and present the whole picture as best as you can, that they can make up their own minds whether they think that issue, this person's argument is more valid than that person's argument. I don't want to be the one in most cases to make that decision. That would be me trying to influence what people think, and that's not my job. My job is to try and inform.
Fair enough, but okay. My example of the flat Earth thing was clearly reducto ad absurdum, but there are real issues. I mean, I used to spend a lot of time watching Sunday morning politics shows, and they would have politicians on. The politicians would say outrageous things, and they would frequently never even try to ask a follow-up question. And that's really the sort of thing I was alluding to, not putting an opinion where opinion wasn't warranted.
Well, that's not to say that if somebody says something that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, that I'm not going to challenge them on it.
Right.
But when all is said and done, when I sit down and say, okay, I've interviewed this person, I interviewed that person, I'm going to try and present what each side said as accurately as I can. During the interview process, if they say something that doesn't add up to me, I'll ask them a follow-up question. Can you, I don't understand why are you making that point, or why do you believe in that certain way? And then I will make note of that, and then the story will reflect that. This person says such and such, and here's why he believes that. This is why this person thinks that other person is wrong. And, here's the data we have to back up one side or the other. And, as a journalist, all I can do is try to present that as best as I can, sort of like an attorney making an argument in a trial. You present the facts, you present the witnesses, and the jury decides what they're going to believe, just like our readers.
I'd like to throw one last thought on that. As someone who fielded questions from journalists, as well as asking them, I'm very happy I had the experience of asking them before I went into that part of the business. But I can tell you that the most elusive of your targets out there will slough off an everyday journalist. Most of the journalists these days think that they're going to make big time, and so they're simply thinking of what their next clever question will be, while they ought to be listening to the answer. So I can tell you that a lot of times what you hear reported by a lazy journalist is what I will let you hear. It doesn't have to be true. It simply has to be plausible. And that goes back to the journalistic ethics and the training. And unfortunately, a lot of the young journalists I see these days are simply filling a blank on their way to the next job. And it doesn't feel, I hope it does to Jeff, because he's deeply in it. But it doesn't feel like it did 50 years ago, when journalism was, at least then, considered an honorable and necessary profession.
Yeah, much like politics.
It's frustrating because I see these surveys that say, what are the most hated or least trusted professions, and like was mentioned earlier, congressmen are down near the bottom. Journalists aren't very high above them, and it is frustrating, because I agree 100% with journalistic ethics and trying to. I think I have an important job, and other journalists have an important job. I mean, the First Amendment, it wasn't there just for window dressing, and so I take that seriously. And it is frustrating when a lot of people don't trust journalists because of what some other journalists, particularly at the the major market level or the national level, some of them are doing things that make me cringe, and not all of them. There's still a lot of ethical, really sharp journalists out there, but the ones who sometimes stray from the straight and narrow give the rest of us a black eye.
Yeah,
I think one of the, Dr. Cummins, if I could just say, I think one of the things that Tom Santulia said on one of the previous ones is that we spend so much time with breaking news, right? Everything cannot be breaking, right? At some point, the media's desire to be first overrides their desire to be correct and to be factual. And given the 24-hour news cycle, given social media, given the fact that, as you pointed out in your opening, that everyone has an opinion. And so if you have a phone, if you have access to social media, everyone can be an expert. And so it kind of diminishes real journalism in a way, and journalistic ethics in a way, because I don't need you to filter the news. If I'm on scene, I can get the news from whoever I follow, whatever trusted source that I've deemed trustworthy, and that can certainly play a role in how I filter out regular, normal means of media and journalism.
I would just like to weigh in just for a minute to say, in terms of the news, we're inundated with negative news 24/7. Somebody would commit a crime or something negative, it's on 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, every day and all. And somebody do something good. I'll pick on my brother, Reverend Wright. If T did something really good in Ithaca, we're here at one time. Reverend Wright did this in Ithaca really well. And then somebody will call you and say, did you get that? No, because it never come back on again. But that negative stuff, and there are politicians who really go out of their way. Like that one lady would say, let's burn down the Capitol. Well, she knows that the media will go crazy on that nonsense. I will cover her one time and put her to bed. So, I mean, if we stop feeding into that craziness, they would have to go to another level, and they might go to a level where they can get locked up. So I don't know, because some of them won't stop, because if you don't cover them at one level, they go to another, but maybe that's okay. We might get rid of them. But I wish we could get more positive news. We are people, I'm a positive person, and I would like every day, I wish I could hear one positive thing from the news that has occurred in my city or in my town or in my state. And we don't get that. But if it's negative, every time you turn on the news, if it's on 3 times a day, that article will be on the news. So I just, to the news people, I don't know what you can do with that, because you work with other people and they might tell you to do that. But some of us like out here would like to hear something positive much more frequently than we do.
Georgia, there's an old saying in news, and I'm sure Steve Sprague knows it: if it bleeds, it leads.
I know.
And unfortunately, to a large extent, that's true. And I've got to tell you, I often will make an effort to search out positive stories like you talked about for my own mental health, because I write plenty of the other kind. Believe me, I write a lot about stories about crime and corruption and people losing everything in fires and car crashes and those kind of things can bring you down. So when I've got an opportunity to write a nice humorous or quirky or offbeat story or heartwarming story, and sometimes people will respond to those stories. And just last year, I did a story about not a real hard news kind of story, but about this dog that ran away from its family and was gone for 14 months. Mm-hmm. And then it turned up 40 miles away, just, pure happenstance, that somebody happened to find it. They got it back to his family. It was a story with a happy ending. And that story got thousands of page views. It was one of my most read stories of the year. And like I said, it wasn't anything that was earth shaking. It wasn't going to change anybody's lives. But it was a feel-good kind of story, and people responded. And stories like that, like I said, it's almost like a palate cleanser for me. It gives me a chance to get a little bit of a break from some of those more depressing kinds of stories.
Well, thank you. Keep it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, NBC during the week in their NBC Nightly News has something called Inspiring America, and they do something about folks that inspire, that are doing good things and so on. And that's a regular feature on NBC News. I think what happens sometimes is there are so many negative stories in the news that they drown out stuff that's positive. So even if there's positive things, you don't think of the positive stories that are run every evening and so forth. One problem, though, is that news, in some cases, has been weaponized and has been commodified. Think of Fox News. Fox News panders to an audience to get ratings and sell advertising time. And we're hearing more and more. There's a court case about Fox News and Fox News personalities such as Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity lying to the viewers about Donald Trump. You know, they're upset and don't like Donald Trump, and they know the election wasn't stolen, but they're telling their audience the exact opposite because that brings in the numbers, the ratings with a conservative audience. So talk about folks not trusting. The interesting thing is that a lot of folks, many folks, but be careful here, many folks that watch Fox News don't care about the truth. As long as they are told something that they want to believe, they'll believe it and defend it and so on. So that's a real problem. It's not only Fox News, it's other outlets also, but it's a sad day, you know, in American journalism and so forth. Tom Santulli, commentator and analyst. Tom, haven't heard from you for a while. I want to bring you back in just to get your reaction to all of this. Tom?
Well, you know, I would go back to where we started when we want to talk about why we like and why we don't like politicians and are we crazy or whatever. You know, I've always felt this way, and I think it's, you know, when you say there's 435 people in Congress, there's 4 people that run Congress, period. You know, it's Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer in the Senate, and then when you go into the House, you know, when you got new with Kevin now is new to it. When Nancy Pelosi was there, I mean, did she allow for just everybody to? I mean, she was a general and a very successful general and well respected, but you never did anything unless you had her okay. And it's no different with Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer in the Senate. And then you add to that, you know, right now what's going on in the country, as much as people didn't like Donald Trump, and I was a guy who didn't particularly care for him, I just saw today that Joe Biden's approval rating fell to 37%, the lowest that's ever been, and one of the lowest in history in modern presidency. And I look at that and go back to where I always start. We're starving, I still believe, for somebody to step up to be a leader who, when the majority of Democrats say they don't want Joe Biden to run again, and the majority of Republicans say that they don't want Donald Trump to run again, you know, who do we talk about all day about running again? Donald Trump and Joe Biden, you know, and I think, and that's media driven. You know, Fox News, quite frankly, there's two sets of news out there. There's the people that give the news. At nighttime, nobody's giving the news. Those are political shows. On all those network stations, those people have their own ideas, their own thoughts, and people flock to listen to them. You know, I just think it's shameful that many people are so easily influenced by some of these folks. And I keep going back. We haven't had a president in a long time who I think that people felt really comfortable with, that people trusted. When you see that 71% of the public don't trust the national media, they don't think they tell you the truth, and Congress has an 18% approval rating. You know, I mean, these are the obstacles that I think that somehow, but it takes people, you know. And the other thought that's in my mind, the reason Santos never was investigated, because nobody ever thought he was going to win. He was kind of a joke candidate. I've talked to people down there. They were shocked when Santos won. I mean, the guy that said he went to Harvard and never even went to college. I mean, are you kidding me? And somebody must have known that. They wrote him off. So I just think there's so much work to do. And until we find somebody, because I think the president's position really does set what a country is all about. And we just haven't had somebody like that in a while that people could look to and I think have a good feeling about. Somebody they felt it was really, it's unfortunate. Guys, it's the most powerful position in the world. And we just can't seem to get somebody to gravitate to that position that people could fall behind and work together. It's pretty pathetic.
Anybody want to jump in and follow up?
Yeah, actually, go ahead, Susan. I've spent more time talking, so.
That's all right. I just wanted to say, though, that Fox News, my understanding, is the most successful cable news organization right now. So when we talk about mainstream versus not mainstream, and, though Trump lost the election, he got a lot of votes. I think there needs to be acknowledgement that, as did Hillary Clinton when she ran, there needs to be the acknowledgement that there's a real divide in this country, and it's about 50-50. And there seems to be, even here tonight, sort of a paradigm that, the other side isn't quite sane, or that they aren't quite, people shouldn't be listening to them. But yet when you have the most successful cable news show, that's a lot of people listening. And if a lot of people are listening to what is perceived to be the wrong thing, there's something very wrong with the country that they're not hearing from other people. They're not hearing the real answers, the real solutions, that it's not touching their hearts in a way that they want to listen to. And so I think that's something that other journalists that perceive themselves as more mainstream perhaps need to take a look at and see what they're missing, that so many people are flocking to these programs.
I have to disagree a little bit. I think Tom is exactly on point. People listen to what they want to hear. However he developed the cult, however he developed the following, Mr. Trump has a very large following. I object because, as the Pollyanna I admit I am, I try to hold honesty, to reject bullies, and to try to put away with journalistic talent, if that's at all possible, those people who are detrimental to the overall, what I believe to be the overall good. Because Fox makes the most money, we've seen in the last couple of weeks how they made the most money by patently lying to and pandering to the crowd that they know is bringing the money in. And so, I just go back to my youth and say, I wish that we could all have a president, and I don't care what party he is, I care about who he is, and whether he deserves the respect. I have two grandsons. One is 16 now. One is about to be 7. But I always think of the president as somebody I hope will be a role model for that person. And, the fact that Biden has very low approval ratings, still, the parties themselves have gone through some pretty tough times finding the right candidates. And then the candidates for the right reasons. But I'm all in favor. I'll be quiet and say, Tom, you're right. We need the leader that's going to bring this country back to center and logic.
That would be wonderful. But actually, a couple of people have mentioned Biden's approval rating, and the thing and I spent a lot of time looking at these. The thing I find amazing about Biden's approval ratings is just how stable they are. they bounced back and forth between a pretty narrow range, and it was largely the same for Trump. And this is one of the things that is at the heart of what we're talking about, because these are no longer driven by who these people are and what they're doing and what their public performance is. We have our camps, and we trust the guy that's in our camp, and we don't trust the guy who's in the other camp. And so these things stay hidden because the day-to-day facts just aren't moving them that much. I mean, that's actually a sign of the problem that we're talking about here.
I'll have to reflect to back into 2020, and my neighbors, they had a sign on their lawn. It said, "Vote for the policies, not the personality." And they were talking about Trump. Vote, saying, hey, and a lot of people liked the policies that the Republicans were putting forward. And they ignored the other things, the personality of this man and how he was really destroying the country, dividing the country. And so we have to really start looking at the total package in terms of the person's personality, their behavior. Are they going to be a good leader? Will people follow them because they reflect good? They reflect the ideals of the country, of the Constitution, not one who wants to get rid of it so that they become king, but one who wants to really follow what the U.S. Constitution represents, what a democracy really is. And if the person's personality is not matching that, even though the policies might be, then we have to say no to that individual.
That's cool. And I would think that the other leg to kind of journalistic and media misinformation is then voters are misinformed, right? And so a misinformed electorate, as Georgia and Tom talked about, kind of voting being a part of what makes this democracy work. It also then, not only do we need informed voters, but we also need to figure out a way to allow more people to vote. And Tom talked about us as a nation, showing up poorly at the polls. But we've also rolled back some voter protections. We've also put in more laws that hinder people from voting. Immediately after Section 5 of the Voter Rights Act was rolled back, 14 states immediately put in fairly, my opinion, toxic restrictions to voting, right? And so what do we do with an uninformed electorate that will turn out in low numbers, that may be disillusioned by both parties, and then the restriction of voting? And so if more people were given the franchise, then perhaps our numbers would not be as low as they are, and maybe these elections would not also be as close as they are, right? If you go by the electorate, certainly we appear to be extremely divided, right? Just almost as Susan pointed out, right? This stuff is very close. Though popular vote in the past two presidential elections hasn't really been as close as the electoral college results that seem to indicate. But I think we can't divorce kind of the media's role in terms of informing people and the uninformed electorate and how that shows up, and then all of the other ways that voting has been chipped away at by intentionally, in my opinion, from certain populations.
Why don't you just go back at this point?
Can I add something on that?
Decades and decades. The fact that most people most of the time don't vote is nothing new. There was a book written decades and decades and decades ago called The Semi-Sovereign People. The author of that book was a fellow named E.E. Schatzsnyder. And he pointed out that most folks, most of the time, don't vote. When they do vote, there's something that draws them to vote. He said that nothing draws a crowd like a fight. And he said politically, if there's something that riles up people, then they'll vote. Otherwise, they won't. So somehow this idea that, whoa, all of a sudden, most people aren't voting is par for the course in American politics, unless something really riles up the voters, then they seem to flock to the polls more than they otherwise would. Question: American politics, has it gone insane? So far, listening to all this, I think it has. I think it has gone insane. You know, what other conclusion can you draw from this discussion? What say you, folks?
I want to weigh in just a minute, Dr. Coleman, in terms of the political playing field. We need to revisit how we enter the playing field. Some of us are so locked into riding the elephant or riding the donkey. We don't check out the best qualified person for the roles that we're talking about. Well, let's say president. We've been elephants all of our lives or donkeys all of our lives. So we'll take the donkey, we'll take the elephant, but we need to start looking at the best person for America, the best person that meet the needs of the people. We have this party loyalty so much so that we overlook all the red flags that we see in the candidates, and we vote for them anyway because it's part of our party. If we can get out of that, because it's getting crazy in there, like I think it was Tom or somebody said, many people are going independent. They are sick of riding those two characters, the donkey and the elephant, when they are not taking us where we want to go. So I believe it's time for us to revisit how we do, because see, the people have the power. We sit here and talk about all of these folks, but we vote those people into office. Think about it. We vote them. They won't get there if we didn't vote them in. So we need to revisit our behavior. What can we do as we the people to make a difference in terms of rearranging the playing field? So I am just tired of what I see out there running around, people who are not qualified to do anything, but we put them there, then we complain for 12 months about this character that we put on the playing field and they cannot hit the ball. So let's not put them in the game. If let's start thinking about that. We're sort of programmed to do what we're doing, because many times we don't even know some of the candidates on our ballot, but they are Democrats, so we check them all. They're Republican, we check them all. We have to better educate ourselves. We have to tune in and get better acquainted with who we're voting for and what do they bring to the table. Some of them are not bringing anything to the table. They're just bringing empty dishes, and we're sitting there filling them for them. So I just hope that it's going to be a wake-up call somewhere along the way where we can say enough is enough and let us take over the playing field and rearrange how the game is played.
And and that's not only on the local level, national level, but it must be also looked at on the local level. Because when I think about what's happened in North Carolina A&T University, which is a historically Black college, university, the students were able to vote there on campus in the library. And what did a North Carolina legislature do? She introduced a bill to eliminate the voting in that in the library. What was her rationale? Well, because it may bring danger to the students. Well, and to me, underneath that rationale, we do have voting machines inside our public schools, and we've had more shootings in the public schools, and yet none in the library at A&T. And so therefore, we look at what's happening with the gerrymandering. So on our local level, we have to look at who are we voting for as our state legislators. And if they're not representing us and our ideals and views, Florida legislature, when we look at what they're doing, particularly with Ron DeSantis yelling this woke, being woke, so forth, so on. The people on that local level, they need to get rid of those their state legislators, vote them out, saying, hey, if you're not representing me, I mean, they didn't care whether Disney World had its own little municipality, but yet this became a national thing, or rather a thing for the state with the governor. So the people on the local levels, we have to start looking at our politicians there. They may not be, getting all the publicity throughout the state, but they certainly are doing a lot of damage. So we do have to look at how we're voting, where we're voting, the gerrymandering that's taking place, particularly when it becomes time for the census in which they use to do the gerrymandering. So we have to look at all these issues and take action.
I was looking at a recent survey about woke, and it seems that most Americans are comfortable with the word woke. They think that people that are quote unquote woke are enlightened, more so than ignorant. And so Republicans are trying to demonize the word woke, and I think they are succeeding to some extent. But most Americans aren't buying it. They're not buying what the Republicans are selling in this case.
Well, we hope so. So
I
far.
hope so.
Steve, I'd like to walk down the street with you and stop people and ask them what the word woke is. I bet you 90% of them couldn't give you a definition of what it is. You know, when I hear about all the woke, most people.
Tom Santulli, very quickly, you're an expert. What summarize what the word woke means.
Well, let me just say this, Steve. I think part of the problem is I don't think that most people have any idea of. I've had woke explained to me 50 different ways, by different people. Their interpretation of the word.
Professor Kolosinski, Professor Joseph Kolosinski, the word woke. What does that mean to you?
What does that mean to me? I think it's a sense that there are problems in the world, and it's up to us to address them.
Well, no disrespect. I bet you if I went down the street tomorrow, that wouldn't be what I would hear. I'm just telling you. I just find it to be one of these things where there's 1,000 interpretations what it is to be woke.
I don't doubt it, but a lot of that's being driven by the fact that certain segments of the political community are turning that into a scare word, like liberal or socialism or populist.
Depends on what street you walk down.
Exactly right.
They're making it negative. Woke can be a positive thing. You're awake. You can see. You're alert. You can do things. If you are asleep, you are out of it because you're asleep. So they've used the word. They don't even know the meaning of the word. And it just kind of humorous because they were asking Judge Brown, the determined woman, wanted her to define what is woman, and they don't even know what the word woke is. And I said, Lord, help us.
Exactly.
Can I say one thing? Rodney, I want to talk about the last election that you had here in legislature in county. I brought it to the Democratic committee that we should actually endorse some Republicans running that didn't have Democrats running because of what was happening at the legislative level here. And I got shot down because they weren't Democrats. See, and to me, that's short-sightedness. They should be supporting the Republican that maybe would reach across the aisle.
We actually had some Republican legislators support Democrats incumbents.
I know that. I agree. And that's what should have happened. So I fought for that and got shot down. And Doctor, one thing real quick, you asked for solutions. To me, a good solution is ranked choice voting. We need to install ranked choice voting across this country and not base it on party at all.
I think approval voting is better than ranked choice voting, but ranked choice voting would be a huge improvement over what we've got right now.
Perfect.
One last thing I want to say, Dr. Coleman, couple of people talked about Congressman Houghton and talking about parties and all. I voted for the man every year he ran. He was the best we could have had. So that's what we're talking about when Deborah mentioned candidate. You look for the best representative you can find in your community and go for it. But we're so locked into for lack of better terminology, craziness, we'll just go along to get along. So I just say to us, it's time to wake up. We talked about woke. That is all.
Congressman Houghton was a great congressman, and he was very independent. One thing I want to point out, though, he had lots of money to be independent. He didn't have to grovel to get campaign contributions like so many other politicians do, and those politicians along the way get tarnished. So I think that's important. Amo Houghton, a great man, but also he had lots of money to be independent, and sometimes he took a stance that was contrary to his party stance. Wanted to mention you've been watching the 31st Political Pundit Night exclusively on mytwintiers.com. Next Pundit Night is Thursday night, July 20th from 7 until 9. Special events on Saturday afternoon, May 13th. a Twin Tiers Unity in the Community Rally at Centerway Square in Corning to celebrate what brings us together rather than what keeps us apart. And I'm co-sponsoring this event with the Elmira Corning branch of the NAACP. I want to thank the executive producer of this program, Dennis Sweeney, WETM executive co-producers, David Sorensen and Lisa Sturdivant. One other thing I want to mention is every year the Elks Club has something called College Night, where different colleges go to the Elks Club and the admissions representatives talk to potential students of any age. And that's going to be on Wednesday, May 10th at the Elks Club in downtown Elmira. Please keep your eyes and ears open for that. There'll be more about it. But that date is going to be May 10th, College Night at the Elks Club. I wanted to thank the folks that gave their time this evening, shared their time for the betterment of the community, in my opinion. Dr. Richard Dozier, author, pastor, educator. Susan Betz-Detoma, attorney and pastor in Corning. Rodney Strange, Chemung County Legislator, 15th District, a Republican. Deborah Lynch, political activist and environmentalist. I also want to recognize her late mom, Ruth Young, who was a wonderful person and a great activist in the community. Steve Sprague, former congressional staffer, former Star Gazette reporter, and former local television journalist. It's great to have Steve here. I hope after experiencing this firsthand, you'll do it again. Georgia Verdier, Elmira Corning NAACP president. Dr. Joseph Kolosinski, associate professor, Elmira College, also a political analyst par excellence. Tom Santulli, former Chemung County executive, who walks his dog almost 2 or 3 times a day at least in West Elmira. Reverend Nathaniel Wright, pastor, Calvary Baptist Church, Ithaca, and former pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church in Corning. And Jeff Murray, veteran journalist for the Star Gazette and the USA Today Network. Boy, this 2 hours went very quickly. Again, I want to thank all of you for participating. My name is Dr. Stephen Coleman, and we'll be back with the 32nd Political Pundit Night. It's hard to believe coming up, and we'll be here before you know it, as I mentioned. So keep here at mytwintiers.com. Next Pundit Night, Thursday night, July 20th from 7 until 9. Thank you, all of you, for being on the panel. And thank you for the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that watch this. We couldn't do it without you. I want to thank WETM, Nexstar Broadcasting, and thank all the folks that make this possible and make this successful. Have a good night, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman.
Good night, Steve.